May I add on that subject, Pat? I think you had a lot of business acumen to lease or rent the land, because land here was selling for, I believe, up to $3,000 an acre, and it really was a foolish investment. So you never got drawn into that. You found the extra land that you needed to make it economically viable by leasing and renting the land.
Well, we should go back one step here, because we didn't really state, in 1960 our dad died, and Mother moved uptown, as we say, with her sister Ann, and I think you took residence here in November, December of 1960?
Well, December of 1960. Mother tried staying out here after Dad passed away.
He died on October 26th.
But she absolutely couldn't stand it. She I think intended to stay here for a while till she got over Dad's death, but she just could not stand living here without him. So when she left, why, we moved in with, well, let's see, 1, 2, 3. Mary was born right after we moved in 1960. She was our, I think, 5th daughter. She was our 5th daughter, born in 1960, right after we moved on this farm.
Well,
and then
now,
Carol came along later,
I think you and Pearl got married in 1953.
1953.
And you started farming. You rented a little farm up near the cemetery.
That's right.
And we all came up and helped you with your first harvest of stones.
Yeah.
You raised mostly rocks at that time.
That farm always raised good stones, and lots of them.
Well, it was, if it was unhappy, our dad died then, which it was, and unfortunately he didn't live to cast his vote for John F. Kennedy a week later.
That's right.
Maybe he helped arrange it wherever he was. But we are very happy you were available to take over, because we still think of it as our farm. So you and Pearl have farmed here since 1960, and I always thought, in a way, along with what Frank said, you transformed this farm from kind of the old way to the state-of-the-art farm.
Well, I remember a couple years after Dad died, and I decided to put up a new silo. And Uncle Jack came down there, and he looked at that thing, and he said, "Your dad would be turning in his grave if he could see you putting up something like that."
We should explain that our father was progressive in a way, but he had this terrible cloud hanging over him of the Depression and no money, and he was raised in some difficult economic conditions. So I think people were stunted in a way because of the terrible memories of the Depression and no money.
Well, actually, there was a lot of land loss that was paid for during the 30s because they couldn't pay the taxes. A lot of good land was lost. It was terrible. The insurance companies owned a good percentage of the land in South Dakota, and when Franklin Roosevelt took office, among his other programs, one of them was that the insurance companies had to sell this land.
You were telling us about our grandfather Lyons, our dad's father.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll continue with one of the programs during the Roosevelt administration was that the insurance companies had to sell this land off. They could not keep it, and so the insurance companies were forced into selling it for whatever they could get for it, and people were so scared to buy anything because they'd seen what had happened where those that did have land and lost it. Bill Sample told me that the 80 joining this farm during the depth of the worst part of the Depression, one day a guy from the insurance company agent stopped in and said to Bill, "I want to sell you that 80 acres of land for $1,000, the whole 80. And Bill said, "I don't have any money. I'm like everybody else." And the guy said, "You don't have to. Just take it over and pay for it when you can." He didn't do it, but he was, like everyone else, was scared. Our grandfather lost his land for $10 an acre in Charles Mix County, which is exactly what he paid for it 40 years before. Well, not 40. It'd be about, 35, I suppose. He lost it for exactly what he paid for it to the Federal Land Bank in 1936. And that's just the way it is. If you can't pay for it, they take it away from you.
Well, when we were growing up here, we all had our chores and the cycle and life of the farm. And where we were standing right before this was in front of the chicken coop, which was appropriate, I feel, because that was one of the most disgusting tasks that had to be done every Saturday, whether we needed to or not, to clean the chicken coop. And then we would manure the fields with the chicken shit. Can we say that on this tape?
Guana, Bob. Guana.
Guana. But I think, as Garrison Keillor said, there was no task ever so rewarding as spreading manure, because at every turn in the row you could look back and see all that you had done. And it gave you a great sense of accomplishment to see that ribbon which you alone had created. And if you didn't do it, you didn't need anybody to tell you that you had screwed it up. Well, Gene, I remember you have occasionally recalled how we worked on the farm, and we always worked. I mean, as farm kids, we didn't have sports uptown or anything. We had our physical education out here. And actually, we met one of Pat's friends this morning who remembers coming to the Willowdale School, which is on this farm, to the Christmas program, and he asked which one of us was it he saw play the guitar and yodel. That was you.
Must have been somebody else.
No, it was you. Well, what kind of chores were you assigned growing up here and doing
Well, of
things?
course, we all did the major things, but we had special things. My assignment was to milk the cows, which wasn't the greatest in a way, but you talked about the chicken house. I always had a complaint against our brother Frank here that he took care of the chickens, but on Saturday I had to help clean the chicken house, but he never did help milk or clean the cow barn. But
Now it comes out. Now I know.
But now it comes out. He told me the other day, he can tell you about his problem with a cow one time, but he said Dad thought he was afraid of cattle, and he never told me any difference. So he Dad didn't assign him milking cows because he thought maybe it was a problem. So he just cleaned the chicken's house, and I think
it was the eggs. He liked eggs and nest eggs and that sort of thing much more.
I don't know if you want to tell about what your encounter.
I was trampled by a cow and with a skull fracture and some pretty good gouges in my face, and I never probably thanked you for saving my life, Gene, because in reality you did. The cow was protecting the calf from the dog. She couldn't get at the dog, so she attacked me.
You were a good substitute.
Right. So you went out and screamed and screamed, and my father, who was going to the field, heard your screaming, and the cow knocked him down, and then he picked me up, took me to the hospital, and I survived.
But it was a pet milking cow, Holstein cow, and she had the calf in the alleyway of the barn, and we came home from school to see the new calf. And he went in first. I went behind him, and the dog came in. I don't remember what dog it was. And Rolly. And she went after the dog, of course, but we were in between. And I remember going out and screaming. And it was a very windy day, and my father was over here somewhere, and he said that the good Lord, somehow the wind was right, so the screams, he heard the screams and came over and got you out. But anyway, but I still didn't like to clean the chicken house.
And you still don't, I think. But it was probably all of that made the farming productive.
Well, we had to go to, some of us had to go to school to realize why that manure was so good. It helped.
Yeah. Well, Pat, when you started farming here, did you farm the way we did? Did you raise all of your crops? And I know you had your sides of beef and all of that sort of thing.
Well, when we started out, we had a few cows to milk. Never the chicken bit, though, because I remember too much of what Gene was talking about. Cleaning
chicken bits, that was what we're called.
So.
But you transformed this into a kind of much larger and focused operation.
Well, bit by bit, yeah. It didn't all come at one time, of course, and just one step at a time, and I guess. Probably if Dad had been looking over my shoulder, a lot of things I was doing, he probably would have nixed it, but
you're a little nervous.
Yeah.
Well, and eventually you raise pigs only. I remember I was here once, and I questioned whether or not you even know which end of the scoop shovel, or at least the manure fork, because you didn't do that anymore. But eventually, you transformed this, I believe, and raised about 800 pigs at a time.
Well, we raised 2,000 a year.
2,000 a year?
Yeah, we had 150 sows, and then we also fed cattle. We used to feed several hundred head of cattle, had a cow herd, and used to have quite a little hired help, 3 or 4 men during the busy season around here, and it was, it was costing, even back in those times, probably $1,000 a day to keep this place going. So it took quite a cash flow to keep everything going.
Well, I know at one time you were so popular, the Russians came to visit you to see your pig operation, I believe.
Well,
in the 1970s?
Yeah. They came to look at it, but of course, over there, the big co-op farms, I think they just kind of snickered at the size of our operation. But I think one thing surprised them was the little bit of labor it took here versus probably the way they did things.
Yeah. Well, and I remember another time there was a big gathering here, including the state representative, and I think it was gathering to demonstrate the merits of the Rural Electrification Association.
Yeah.
When the then president had threatened to sell it off, and I think it was Representative Tim Johnson. And the reason I remember this, our late mother, Mary Lyons, got herself right up next to you. Yeah. And she told me I made sure that he understood the history of farming in South Dakota, and she filled his ear.
Yeah.
And maybe if our cameraman focuses over toward the garage, there is a light pole next to Pat's Model T. And I still remember when that pole came, I think in 1941. Right. That's the original REA pole, which I think we all remember.
Still
And up until that time, nobody in the East believes these stories, but we generated our own electricity, didn't we?
32 volts direct current with a Delco plant in the basement. And when the engine wasn't running, the power source, weak and feeble as it was storage batteries.
Yeah, well, you had to light a match to see if the lights were on.
Right.
Well, I still remember that pole. And driving here yesterday from Sioux Falls, as we drove by the University of South Dakota, there's a plaque right outside of Vermilion, a historical marker. And Nona, my wife, said, "What is that?" We stopped. That is a marker marking the first rural electrification cooperative, which was Clay County, in 1939.
Well, even to this day, so many people think that the REA is just a big government giveaway. And it never was. All it was a program that the private power companies never would have gotten power out to the outlying regions. But they set up a program where the REA co-ops were developed, and they borrowed money at a lower interest cost than the normal. That was, and as far as the power from these dams, people have the conception that, we get all this cheap power. Well, that's not true. First of all, the power is all hooked together in a grid that covers the whole United States. And our power cost us is equal to, or maybe even more than, the private power companies today. Because when the REA's lines were put in originally, they cost $1,500 a mile. Now they're wearing out, and it costs $20,000 a mile to replace those wires and poles out there.
Maybe Dave could just span the camera if we walk just a little bit, just to get a sense of all of the machinery that you had to operate this farm.
Yeah, well, we'll get a shot of that.
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow, too, because it's not all out there. As far as machinery lineup, maybe we could get a shot of the hog confinement buildings.
Well, can we just walk this way? I think we're on. So this up here on the right is where you raised your 2,000 pigs, I believe.
Yeah. 2,000 a year. There weren't 2,000 at one time, but that was the output in a year. And